Successful farming is an operation where the farmer actually has a plan and the plan is implemented, and result of the implementation is the success of growth of plants and crops, fruits, nuts, vegetables on his farm. That is a successful farming. To be successful in farming, we need to understand the weather conditions in our region. There are two things. People normally mix them up from time to time, like referring to the weather and climatic conditions. But climatic conditions are different from weather. Climatic condition is a condition within a region, and weather conditions are weather conditions only specifically refer to a particular vicinity or an area. So understanding the climatic conditions is very important, because in PNG we are placed next to the equator, and we seem to be, we are influenced, our farming system is influenced by only two climatic conditions, and that is the wet season and the dry season. Climatic condition and local weather conditions, there is a difference between both of them. Is that the climatic conditions, they actually describe the climatic conditions for a particular region, by a region. For example, the PNG climatic condition is influenced by the southern pole weather conditions. So we have wet and dry. The wet begins in January and ends after April, or sometimes goes into May. And from April, May, June, July, August, September, and to October, we have a dry period. And then we receive a little bit of rain to reach December, and then it starts again in the other year. That is basically the climatic condition in PNG. However, the weather conditions that mostly farmers refer to are specific to a particular site. And this means that the conditions are basically local. They do not influence a wider region at large. That is the difference between the weather conditions and the climatic conditions. These two conditions, they influence farming system in a big way. And for the success of the farmer needs to understand the general climatic conditions of the region, and then he has to bring it down to the local weather conditions of the area. In that way, his predictability is within the range, and it's to a certain level, like up to 90% correction is there, so that when he's planning for his farm, it's within the success range. Otherwise, he has to also make decisions on selecting specific fruits, nuts, and vegetables to grow within these periods. The farmer needs to, for the farm to be successful, for successful farming, the farmer needs to make several decisions. And that is based on the cycles of individual crops. Like we have monthly crops or short-term crops. They can be grown in a month, and these are green vegetables. Especially we look at pak choy, green boy, saladia, wongbok, maybe ibica to some extent. You can clip the leaves of ibica, then they regrow again in a month, and you have them ready at the end of the month again. So we call them very short-term crops or monthly crops. Then we have the medium-term or short-term crops. Short-term crops are vegetables that can grow up to 3 months. And the 3 monthly crops are like broccoli, cauliflower, capsicum, carrots, and all that. They have a very short-term period and only up to 3 months. Then we have the medium-term crops. These are like sweet potato, sugar cane. And then we have annual crops or one-year crops. That's like cassava, bananas. They are one-year crop and they can grow for 1 year. And then we have the long-term crops. These are crops, tree crops, fruit trees, and nuts that can grow for over 50 years. Even some can grow and produce up to 80, 90 years. Like coconuts can grow up to 80, 90 years and still produce. The yield may not be high as when they are young, but they can still produce even up to 80, 90 years. And that's the range that many farmers do selecting their crops when it comes to selecting their crops. But nowadays, many farmers tend to select monthly crops, short-term crops, medium-term crops, and then annual crops, because they can harvest them in a month for monthly crops, especially vegetables. They can harvest them in 3 months' time, and they can harvest them medium-term crops in 6 months, and then they can harvest them in 9, 10, 11, and 12 months. Depending on the soil conditions, they can start harvesting from 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 months. So for successful farming, the farmers need to make some specific decisions. And based on those decisions, they can be able to plan and roll out their program in the year, depending on which crops that they choose to plant within the year for food crops, nuts, vegetables. Mostly for fruit trees, nut trees, they are long-term crops. And they grow for more than a year. Sometimes, like fruit trees, cocoa grows up to 15 years. Between 10 and 15 years, cocoa production declines when they reach 10 years. From 10 years to 15 years, the trees will require replanting, but that's the maximum time. And then we look at other trees like the fruit trees. They can grow up to 20 years, 30 years, like for mangoes, avocado. They can grow over 20 years. Between 20 years to 30 years, they can grow. And then we have long-term crops. These are crops like the coffee, coconuts, some nuts like nut trees like garlic nuts. They can grow the lifetime of actually the whole lifespan of a person. So the farmer's decision to select the type of crops is also depends on the size of the family, yes, the size of the land, yes, what he wants to allocate for vegetables and what he wants to allocate for medium term, especially tree crops that can grow between 20 years to 50 years. And then what he wants to, leave behind for his family. Those are some of the decisions that the farmer needs to make for the success of his livelihood when it comes to successful farming. Let me share this with the farmers. I have observed in my more than 30 years as an agricultural extension, research, extension and development officer, I have observed that many farmers do not understand well the climatic conditions that they are subjected to, and then the local weather conditions that they are also subjected to. And so I have also observed that when they do not understand the weather conditions, they seem to be selecting and planting crops at the wrong times. And as a result, they run into a lot of problems, like crops that require high water input must be planted during the wetter times. And those that require much more drier period, they have to select them for the drier parts of the year. And then they have to decide the high value crops, especially the fruits, nuts, and the vegetables. They're very high value. What do we mean by very high value? They can be planted in a shorter period of time. They can grow, and then they are ready for harvesting. They can be consumed by the family themselves or sold for an higher amount of money. And that activity can be kept consistent throughout the year, earning them an income consistently over the year. They can have other crops like medium-term crops, sugarcane, sweet potato, and annual crops like bananas, cassava. But they also have short-term crops and high-value crops which they can continually have for their own consumption. At the same time, they can continually sell them to generate income for themselves and their families. And so, farmers out there, I advise you that you have to understand your climatic conditions, appropriately select the crops that you wish to plant, both for short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And then you have to mobilize some little bit of resource and planning so that you continually have food to eat, food to sell, and continually you have a source of income that you can survive with your family throughout the year.